Okay, so we're recording now. So yeah, this is the second open forum of bringing together Globe students to informally chat about trees campaign. Don't have students here right now, but we have some educators, and this is great. So what we want to do is we want to talk a little informally about everything. How the process. What we did yesterday was we had little intro, which I'll do a short intro, and then a little discussion about the campaign. I'm going to go in there and show quickly the campaign page, and then also some of the tools, and Dorian and Peter and Christopher, and we'll talk a little bit about some things that that they work on as part of the campaign, and what can be done. Basically what can be done for students to develop research projects. What are the tools they can use, which are all part of the campaign? How do they do the protocol measurements? How do they make sense of that data they're doing with the data that they get from their protocol measurements, and how they can create research projects using everything from these online tools, which Peter Nelson we'll discuss briefly, and then also the guiding investigative questions that we have for the campaign that Dorian will talk about, and then Peter Falcon is really good at working with the schools around the world to have them collaborate with each other. The importance of that collaboration is super vital for research projects. You want to know what's happening in your local environment, but you also need to know what's happening on other places on the planet at the same time. So that's what we really want to push for. So yeah, let's get started. So I'm gonna quickly go, and most of you know our campaign team. We have Dorian here. She's at NASA Goddard. Peter Nelson, Oregon State University, Dr. Christopher Schumann at NASA Goddard UMBC, and Peter Falcon at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And myself, I'm at home right now in Salisbury, Maryland, but I work at the NASA Wallows Flight Facility in Virginia. And today, this is just what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little about, it's going to be open forum. This is completely informal. That's why we had lots of discussions previous, to me starting the recording, but this is really informal and just a discussion about what students can do in order to work together on student research projects that can be sent to that can be submitted to the International Virtual Student Symposium, the IVSS, or if you're in the United States, it can be a part of the Student Research Symposium that are in the the Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, Southeast, Central. So yeah, the sky's the limit with this. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then I just want to mention this. This is just announced, and it's on the website now. Our next campaign webinar will be with Dr. Josh Fisher from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he's going to be discussing how much water do trees use and need. And the information that he's working with is from the new NASA EcoStress mission on the International Space Station. So it's an instrument on the space station that's able to look at things like this, and try to identify, how much water do trees use and need. So perfect for our campaign. And thank you to Peter Falcon for suggesting me contact Josh and talk to him about it. And, Josh was, jumped right on and was like, yeah, this sounds great. I definitely want to do it. So it's going to be Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. I can't believe I'm saying 2020 already, at 2 p.m. Eastern time, which is 7 p.m. UTC. So let's jump into the website. Just want to show you a couple quick things here, and then we will progress into the next. So you should be able to see my website here. And if you have any questions or anything that pop up, just pop them in the chat. Or one thing I did mention in the webinar yesterday with the students and teachers is that if you can think of any would be really good research questions, just pop them in the chat, because I've put together from the first webinar a whole documented list of what are these questions that are popping up that the students were wondering about, that they thought might be good research projects, that teachers did as well. We had some great ideas bouncing back and forth between the students and the teachers, and there were a couple informal educators there as well. So, I'll be compiling that and putting that on the website with the archived webinars. So here we have the GLOBE, GLOBE program, and if you want to go to the campaign, I know sometimes the GLOBE website is a little daunting if you're not familiar with it. So if you just want to, scroll across here, it says Do GLOBE, and if you scroll down to Measurement Campaigns, move on over to Field Measurement Campaigns and click that, and you should get a list popping up where the Trees Around the Globe campaign is the first one. You can click on that, and it'll take you right to our website. So lots of cool things going on here, but this is the website, and everything from where all the webinars are to how the most important part I think on this web page is start taking measurements, because this is what I get a lot of emails from new GLOBE people saying, how do I get started on just taking these protocol measurements? And there's a whole thing here about how to get started. And then I should also say, if you go to the main page, there's a lot of explanation about why the campaign, why we're doing it, what are some of the tools you can use, and how to join the campaign. And then you can go right to the Start Taking Measurements. It'll tell you what to do and what protocols and why we're doing it, what protocols are our main focus. And as you know, it's a Trees Around the Globe student research campaign. So tree height is the main protocol, but we have land cover and green up, green down, and carbon cycle we added in there too. And then we also have the baseline protocols, which, in order to get a better picture of what's happening in your environment, we ask that you take baseline protocols like the simple ones like air temperature, surface temperature, soil temperature, because all these things help us understand that local environment better. If you have that more robust data set, and data density there, you'll be able to understand what's happening better in your environment. So let me jump into this next one here, and I will pass it over to Dorian in a second, but the guiding investigative questions, okay? And these are questions that are that we set up. This isn't an exhaustive list of potential questions, but these are questions that are to be used to, to try to answer as they explore the data that they've collected. So Dorian, I'll pass it over to you to talk about the guiding investigative questions.
Sounds like a plan. Make sure that I'm unmuted here. So with the guiding investigative questions, one of the things that is so important is that you brainstorm, you look at these guiding investigative questions that we kind of come up with, and then you brainstorm ways in which they would be relevant, in your setting to your students. So a couple of them that I wanted to show you. You can take a look at the list that is on the website, but a couple ones I wanted to expand upon. One of them is, where are trees growing and why are they there? So in my particular yard, as I sit here at my desk, if it was light, I could look out and I could see probably about 30 different trees. And one of the things I really like to do with the app is to go out and keep track once a month of how the trees are growing. We recently planted 6 trees in my yard. I live in a place that used to be a farm, so there weren't that many trees around. And we built the house about 22 years ago. So, kind of been watching trees growing ever since then. So it's really neat to me to kind of get a feel for how fast are these trees growing, and then even to get a sense of what kind of trees do I have here. How many of them are, local to the Maryland area? How much rain do they need? What are some of the temperature conditions? So even though I've looked at these trees, looked out my window and seen these trees for the last 21 years since I've been here, or, some of them, I haven't really learned very much other than saying, knowing one is a sugar maple and, one is an oak. I haven't really learned much else about them and gotten a better understanding of what their needs are. And, which are the best kinds of trees to have in my area. So in any case, that would be kind of a neat thing for, I think, any students to do, is to just do an inventory in their school location, maybe even adopt a couple of trees each, for each small group, get to know a lot about the tree and, study it, find out what the, what the environmental parameters are, as in temperature, soil conditions, that they grow best under, and even get a feel for how long they're going to be around. Lots of other questions there, things like, what are the tools for measuring trees and the errors between them? Be a really neat activity to use clinometers and also use, maybe you could even try a couple of different kilometers and also use the tool, the tree height tool, and compare and contrast the data that students find. That would be a really neat engineering type of an activity there. What is the distribution of tree height measurements around the world each month? So you could collaborate with other folks that are collecting tree height measurements and learning about the different types of trees. 2 or 3 schools around the world could compare and contrast the kind of trees they have and look at their climate, look at their globe data that they're collecting, and get a feel for, what the differences are. So, the sky is the limit when you're talking about things like trees. And I think what's really neat about them is that they're kind of like clouds, and that they're always around, and we've known, about them. We've seen them for such a long time, but often we don't really make or have or take the time to get to know them on a more personal basis. So think about that. Think about any ideas you have while we're talking tonight. If any ideas come to you that either your students have already used as investigative questions, or you're kind of brainstorming this might be a neat question, please throw it in the chat window, because we're always trying to find more questions and get a feel for what are some other ways in which people like to, learn more about the trees in their environment. And all right, there you have it.
Thank you, Dorian. Yeah, so as Dorian mentioned, that the guided investigative questions are just really cool tools, and there's so many other questions that can possibly be thought of. These are just a small sampling of things that we were thinking of, which might lead to good research projects. What can be explored while looking at the data as well. And Peter Nelson mentioned in the comments that you can practice your computer science and analysis skills by using data already in the GLOBE database. Yes, there's lots of data in the GLOBE database. Over, 150 million data points or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, there's lots of data. You can get it in different formats. So so there's lots of ways to do that. So let me quickly pop over here, and I'm going to go to a page here just to make sure that people know where it is. The IVSS. If you click here on news and events, so this is where we're going to go, and it's a great place for students to submit their research projects. So we go to events here under news and events, and then go to virtual science symposia, and then the IVSS information will pop up on the left. And if you click on the 2020, actually this one might be the one that's up already. No, it's not. So yeah, the 2020 International Virtual Science Symposium. So if you scroll down here, it tells you all the info about it. That looks like submissions start in early January of 2020, and then I believe everything's due by March 10th, so it's pretty early. So this is a place to go to look at everything IVSS, and then as you know, if you've had students submit to this before, they are judged, professionally by scientists, by GLOBE personnel, by NASA personnel, educators. So there's lots of people who are reviewing these and for the competition. So it's a really, really great program, great competition. So that's where you find that. Now, last thing I'm going to pop in and show you is, if you want to look at like some GLOBE data, I'm just going to show you, a lot of students have issues with trying to find, some of the data, whether it's visualized or retrieved. So if you go to GLOBE data, we're going to go to the GLOBE visualization system, and it's a nice, pretty map that pops up when you hit enter visualization system. So let's wait for a second here. So you get this nice map, and we're going to go over here to the left. You have this layer button, and if you scroll down, we're just going to go into biosphere since we're talking about trees, and let's just go to tree height. I'm going to do tree height and tree photos. Now the photos are the ones that are coming in from the NASA Globe Observer Citizen Science App's Trees tool, because when you do a submission there, you have to take a picture of the tree in your location, and then that gets submitted to the GLOBE database, and you'll see these will pop up. So I'm just going to hit submit here, and this shows you, it defaults to 1 year. So these are all the measurements, tree measurements that came in within the last year. The green are just the measurements that have come in. The pictures will show up in a second. They take a little longer. There's a little, it's a bigger file to pop those up. But what you can do is, if you knew you took measurements on a specific date, you can actually go up here and change it. Oh, there you go. Now you can see all the photos that have come up about trees. Now, the ones with the photos, those are the ones from the Globe Observer, and the ones you see with the little tree here, without the picture, most likely those came from, students or educators doing it through the regular Globe, through the regular Globe method. But yeah, if you scroll, might take a little bit here, but so we can get a global view. So if you happen to, let's just say you took measurements on a different day. So I'm going to go up here to, got to wait till that tree photo comes in there. Wait for that for a second. As you can see, we have a lot of information in the database right now. Oh, this is what you have to do. Sorry. If you go over here to under tree height, you have, it says 1 day. So I'm going to click on 1 day. And then you can go up here under measurements. And let's say you took tree height observations. I'm just going to randomly grab a date here. And of course, I grab the date where nothing is popping up right now. All right. Let's try something else. Let's go back here. I thought one came up there the other day. I guess not. I'm striking out here. Jeez. I guess I'm not patient enough. So, but what you can do here is look at, try to get one that actually comes up. Well, I'm going back to today or yesterday. So something should come up. Maybe I'm just not letting it take enough time on the. There we go. All right. Oh, I guess I'm sorry. I was going too fast. It's been a long day. I wasn't hitting the update button. Sorry about that. So 12/2/2019. Here we have the tree height observations that have come in for just that day. And if you can click on it, if you click on the picture, you can go over to measurements and it'll tell you a little bit about it, what the elevation was, what the tree height was, if they happen to measure the circumference. It'll tell you how many data counts were there, the site info. So it'll give you the lat long of the location and then also a picture of the tree. So this happens to be in Thailand. So great. So what you can do is, if you happen to take, a picture of a tree or tree observations or land cover observations or greening observations on that same day, you can see what other people are seeing, possibly at that same time. So it's good to, see what's going on. So, but yeah, you can look at any day and it goes way back, to actually to 1995. They started doing the tree height observations. And I think there's in the database, the tree height observations, there's almost 24,000 tree height observations since 1995. So there weren't a lot, in the last years before the campaign, and before the release of the NASA Globe Observer Tree Stool. So we have lots more coming in. So there's lots to look at in the database. All right. So I feel like I need to stop talking and. What I want to do now is I want to pass it over to, since we're looking at the website, Peter Nelson, can you give a little discussion about, some of the online tools that you've been working with and you think might benefit the students?
I definitely can, Brian. Let me just grab the computer there, and I'm going to share my web browser so that we can all kind of walk along together. And I wanted to start off with kind of, this larger question about why are we concerned about trees to begin with? And this was a question that came up yesterday, and I realized it's a pretty important one. And so, a lot of what we're talking about here is really looking at the energy cycle that, is part of Earth. And trees are a big part of the carbon cycle as well as the water cycle. In particular. And so, one of the things that tree height is really helpful for is actually understanding the carbon cycle and in particular, how carbon is stored on different landscapes across Earth. So I just wanted to highlight that this My NASA Data is a great website that has a lot of background material, and resources for both teachers as well as students to explore, just start exploring and understanding that piece. And then there's some interesting pieces over here that I appreciate, things like looking specifically at deforestation, for instance, or phenomena like tree changes over time, and a little bit more higher level concepts and ideas. And so, you know, part of that is just starting to understand that why NASA actually cares about this. And that carbon cycle is a big part of why NASA actually cares about just mapping out and finding out where are trees located on Earth, and then importantly, you know, where, how are they changing over time, and then, you know, trees are a three-dimensional part. They grow up, and so that how high they grow can tell us a lot about ecosystems. So I wanted to really highlight that because it's a really important part about the carbon cycle and thinking about why trees are actually important. So, you know, that's one piece. And then there's a couple other articles that are available out there on a NASA website called Earth Observatory that actually gets in and explains a little bit more about that carbon cycle. And again, kind of going back to that photosynthesis piece. And this is, you know, really important because it was only 9 years ago or so where NASA helped to contribute to creating the first global map of tree height or forest height. And that was with a satellite that started before ISAT-2. It was actually the ISAT-1. And so using that satellite as well as some other information was the first data set that globally shows us where trees are located. And so I highlight this because this is all part of the science process that NASA is involved with and that we want everybody here to be involved with too. It's not just that we make one map and we call it done. It's in fact an ongoing process of creating a map and then looking at how good is that map. So you might actually go to find out a little bit more about this data set itself, and you can actually find it available online and be able to download the data, even if, you know, to be able to look at what was the tree height in my area 10 years ago, or when this map was made, and has it changed? Kind of going back to those guiding questions. And I want to highlight one of the things that can be really helpful with this is on the GLOBE website is actually a couple pieces within the biosphere part that actually help us all sort of understand classifications. What are we even talking about when we say a tree? What does that actually mean? And actually defining what a tree is kind of this first step. Before you go out and measure something, you kind of need to know what you're looking for. So I encourage you to go into that GLOBE website and explore some of these. Like this leaf classification is a great one that allows you to talk about classification, differences between different types of trees. Again, what does that actually mean? And start to define some of these things so that when you do go out, and one of the things that has really kind of popped up is recently there was kind of this article talking about whether we can use trees, planting trees to help mitigate climate change. So again, kind of going back to what Dorian was initially talking about, she planted some trees, and we want to know how successfully have they actually been growing over time. So I wanted to kind of highlight these little pieces because there's a lot of information out there that we can all use to better understand what was there before and what was there afterwards. And I'll highlight a different tool than what I did yesterday initially, but there's this tool created by a group called Global Forest Watch. And it actually was one of the first maps globally that allows us to see not only where trees are located, but how they've been changing over time. And this Global Forest Watch map, it actually allows you to go in yourself and look at some of these locations. And so this was created using Landsat satellite data that gets us down to 30 meters pixels on the ground. So we have millions of these. But you can kind of see, just even with this map, where things are sort of happening on Earth. And kind of the dynamic areas, like especially here in the Southeast United States or in the Amazon area in Brazil. We can see some areas in Chile, for instance. And then also if we scroll over, we can see a lot of activity and changes happening in the African tropical forests there, as well as in the northern forests. So this is a really powerful tool set that allows you to go in and start exploring just where trees are located. And then I'll end my little piece here with the tool that I really like to use a lot, which is NASA's Worldview. And part of the reason why I like this is because it brings in together a lot of the different data sets that different NASA scientists actually create. And you can see inside of here, one of them is the satellite detections of fires. And this can be a really powerful way to start looking at how a forest might be changing or natural hazards that it might be around you. And again, one reason why we want to go out and measure trees is because they could change. They may actually burn up in a forest fire like this. And we can actually start looking at something like this and asking questions about why do we have so many hotspots or fires occurring in these areas. And here we're looking at July 2019, but you can scroll through and start changing the months and time traveling. And as we go forward in some of the months, we actually start to see those fires in Africa start to go down and go away. But this is a great way where you can even go back into the past and look at previous fires in your area or globally. How are these things working together to contribute to that carbon cycle? Because fire is a natural part of these ecosystems in a lot of cases, but sometimes they're due to human activity. So I wanted to highlight this Worldview website because it has lots and lots of data. And one of the ones that I find to be really useful is when you go in, there's this vegetation one, and you can actually look at the gross primary productivity, or how much is a forest photosynthesizing. And so, this really allows us to start looking at where is the green areas on Earth. And if you use something like this to first get an understanding or to compare to your measurements, all of a sudden you start to be able to contextualize or add a little bit more information to what you're seeing. And we can actually really see how in North America here right now, we don't have a lot of photosynthesis happening, especially compared to an area like the Amazon basin. And if we just slide back in time, go back to say the summer, August, all of a sudden you can actually see that green up and how much more photosynthesis was happening out there. Some of it to trees, some of it to grasses and other things like that. But this is just one of the tools that I really like to use to start bringing in that NASA data, to be able to start exploring and seeing patterns and start to ask some of those guiding questions. So with that, I will pass it back to the rest of the group so that we can explore some of the other data and tools that they like to highlight.
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, so Peter mentioned, one of the things that he mentioned, when you look at, your area, what did trees look like? What trees were there in the past? What did it look like? And that's one thing that Dr. Christopher Schumann has been working on a little bit. He's been looking at old remote sensing images from aircraft, and I know some satellites. So Christopher, would you like to just mention some of that? I know you were doing some stuff with some of the NASA centers. You've been looking at that data.
Well, there's definitely an evolution of landscapes around the world, and part of that is through development. Part of that is through the growth of the evolution, the environment that's already there. So aerial photographs precede satellite imagery in a number of areas. And they enable us to look at what landscape elements have really changed. Trees in particular around Goddard Space Flight Center have changed dramatically as the center has expanded from its initial inception in 1959, 1960 into the big broader campus that exists today. And some of this is very clearly documented in a succession of aerial images, and more recently, high-resolution satellite images. What we can understand from that is the need to, shall we say, appreciate how much carbon that was stored in trees has been lost, and what we might need to do to compensate for those losses over the years as urban areas have expanded into forested areas. That's something that may be important down the road for programs like Globe Trees to try to understand what we need to do to balance out the losses against areas where trees can be replanted and sustained in the changing environment in which we live.
Excellent. Thank you, Christopher. Yeah. So you can get what Christopher was talking about with the imagery and things changing over time, and the online tools that Peter Nelson was talking about, and the guiding investigative questions that Dorian was talking about. There's lots of great resources out there for students to take to do student research projects, and take their own observations, take their own measurements, but also, like Peter Nelson mentioned, looking at the data that's on the GLOBE database already. So there's so much data out there, so there's lots of data there to help out any research project that can be done. So let me open it up now if anybody wants to talk about any questions, and then I'll bring Peter Falcon in a little bit for discussion about talking about why it's really important to have students work together. So is there anybody want to have any questions or ideas for potential research questions? I saw somewhere in there Laureen was talking a little bit about some of the questions, and I know Peter Nelson went and answered the questions a little bit. But the questions that Laureen was mentioning, these could essentially also be research questions for students. They could fall into that realm. And questions are, is there a way to correlate tree heights and tree ages? And then also, what will happen with the population in our parks when the old trees die and there are no young ones growing? That's a pretty tough question maybe for, students to do in like a couple months, but, it's something that they can think about. That's what we're trying to do with this campaign. We're trying to get the students to take the observation, take the measurements, and then think about what their data means, and then develop something meaningful in a research project. It could be a simple research project, could be a very complex one. We've seen all of them with the campaigns over the years. So does anybody want to unmute themselves and start a discussion? Feel free, don't be shy. It's all informal here. If anybody's talking, they're still on mute.
I don't mind talking now that I can see you. It's been very interesting with me for the students, because when we get the different data points, and we've done the clouds, we've done the tree heights. We didn't actually enter the data points for the tree heights because they were like all over the place. And I realized one of the issues that I'm having with the tree heights is when the ground is at a slight angle. That's going to change, I know, the height of the tree, but how can I tell where the ground is flat relative to the tree, because it's New Mexico and it's all kind of uneven?
So are you doing it using the clinometers, or are you using the app?
Well, at first we had paper clinometers, then I bought the little green ones with the thing. And then I got the app going. So when I did all three of them, I got all three totally different things. And I couldn't submit it. But so with the app, if you're standing with the app, because it talks about, an incline, I mean, how much of an incline is going to change the actual measurement?
Yeah. So I know Peter Nelson has been talking about that, and I don't know if Peter wants to jump in, but yeah, it definitely will, because it has to do with your pacing, towards a tree. Your pace is going to be different, walking uphill or downhill versus on a flat surface. I'll let Peter jump in if he'd like to.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually you pretty much nailed it, Brian. The way that the tool within the Globe Observer app works is it does sort of assume that your paces are going to be consistent, and that when you take one step forward, you're taking a certain distance. And as soon as you get on a slope, you have to correct for that, because one step forward, you're actually going up a bit. And so there's a whole kind of trigonometry piece that you can actually build in and kind of figure out what is the slope that you're on, and by doing some measurements. And I just popped into the chat. Globe does have some tips on how to measure a tree on a slope to deal with that. So I just popped that in there, because you do have to figure out the slope distance first, and then you can figure out the tree height itself.
Yeah.
And so Laureen, one of the things that is recommended in the Globe database or in the Globe protocol is to take multiple measurements of a tree and average them together. Because exactly what you're talking about. And this is a great class activity where you can just ring a tree with a bunch of students, and each one of them can take a height measurement, and then you're actually you can put error bars on your measurement, which is an important concept, because just because you make a measurement doesn't mean it is correct. And so there is some error associated with that. And the more that we can teach students about that error associated with that, that's really the important part, because the only way to really know exactly how tall that tree is to climb the tree and to drop a tape measure from the very top. Even a LiDAR system, the laser system, has some error associated with it. And these clinometer methods from the ground also have some error associated with it. So here in Oregon, when we're trying to measure with the tallest tree that's around, you actually have to go up and climb the tree as the only way of really knowing where the top is. And that's not feasible, right? So the only other way that we can really, that we do it from the ground safely and fast, is to make multiple measurements from from different angles, and then average them together, and then you can 45. Yeah, and then you can know my tree is 20 meters tall plus or minus 2 meters, right? So it's actually anywhere between 18 and 22. And especially when you're dealing with certain types of trees, sometimes they flatten out on the top. Sometimes they're a little bit more pointy, or maybe the top's been blown off. And so some of that, you will actually get a different number if you change your angle. And that's one of those nice remote sensing concepts, is you change the angle of the way that you're taking your measurement, and you might come out with a slightly different result. So that's a little long-winded way of saying, some of my recommendations. And one of the other things that can be really challenging is getting a clear view of that tree, right? So we're automatically kind of eliminating these areas that have dense trees or might have the most amount of carbon in our area for our measurements. And so there's some trade-offs in terms of sort of what you can do in a school setting versus what the professional scientists like to ask of everybody. And we would love it if everybody climbed those trees, but who has time to climb the trillions of trees that are out there? So sampling is our next approach.
Yeah, and that leads me to thinking that what Peter's mentioned and what Laureen brought up is that is actually one of our guiding investigative questions. The fourth one down here, what are the tools for measuring trees and the errors between them? So you can use that type of question, what you just talked about, Laureen, could essentially be a student research project, having them take, measurements like you've done with all these different tools, and then figure out, hey, look at the errors here. Look at the errors when I'm on an incline, on a slope versus a flat surface. So yeah, I mean, I could essentially see that as well. That's a pretty cool research project, and it would help a lot of people out, if they, figured out, potentially what a solution to that is. And, as Peter put in the chat, the globes measuring a tree on a slope. So some of the helpful hints there for doing that using basically the paper clinometer. Okay, anybody else? I promise I won't call on anybody.
That was a very good question. I know that came up in the last meeting as well. So thank you very much for the good explanation, Peter. And the good question, Laureen.
I will say that I just actually put in the chat a little video, a short, I think it's maybe 7 to 10 minute video that was produced by the Oregon Public Broadcasting that actually talks about exactly what I was just discussing and sort of how they're looking for the tallest trees. This is something that a lot of foresters like to do, and I think is a really good sort of guiding question. Where is the tallest tree in your community, in that area? And then, there was a question earlier about, can we relate the height of trees to the age of trees? And they don't exactly line up. And there's a different method that foresters like to use where they will actually core a tree. So they'll actually remove a small little cross section at 4.5 feet tall, there and actually count the number of growth rings, right? So that is actually the only way that we really know how old trees are. And for instance, New Zealand right now actually is on track to have taller redwood trees than the California coast, because they're growing so much faster there than they are actually on the California coast. So even the same trees, tree species can actually grow at different rates depending on their climate. So the height of tree is only one indication of the health of that ecosystem. And it really is actually getting in and counting rings of trees that allow you to better understand how old those trees are. And so that's a really good sort of question that tree height is just one of the metrics that foresters like me like to look at. It's also that circumference. How big around is that tree? Because that, again, kind of goes to how much carbon can be stored in that tree. How many branches does it actually have as well, kind of going up? The architecture of that tree is a really fun one to explore as well. Again, kind of going back to how much carbon can be stored in that area. And then, those are the things that end up changing over time. And so trees are never quite static. And I forgot about this when we were first initially going through this, is trees actually continue to grow during the winter a bit. They actually put on a little growth ring inside of there. So actually going back and measuring the same tree in the springtime after you've measured it in the fall, you might actually see a growth or a change in that tree height. And so I thought that was something, it's very easy to take these things for granted because they're long-lived and they're in an area for a longer period, but they are dynamic and they are changing, they're growing. And so, helping us to all kind of cultivate that curiosity in our landscape around us, and that it may seem static, but it's actually changing, I think is a really good outcome from a lot of the activities that we're talking about here.
I just posted a little Wikipedia connection to what may be a tree that was well established at the signing of the U.S. Constitution, called Travilla Oak, nearby here in Maryland. It's a gorgeous tree. It's worth a visit if you're in the area.
Oh, that's really great. I'm just popping in. Apparently, I'm feeling a little chatty here at this 5 o'clock evening hour on the West Coast. I really like this idea of a witness tree, right? Like some of these
Yep.
long-lived trees that have actually been there allows you to not only talk about the science, but actually bring in history and some of that piece to what we're talking about. And this idea of a witness tree is really powerful. And I think, you know, again, kind of that goes back to where's the tallest tree in your local area and what has it witnessed? And actually using that term witness tree is a really good one. And even having students think about what will that tree witness over the next 50 years, and kind of thinking about that is a great way to bring in you know, this thing that can actually live a really long time in a lot of areas. So thanks, Chris. I really appreciate you bringing up that concept of a witness tree.
That's a really neat idea. You know, that could also be if students were to adopt a tree, or I could even really see this with adults as well. I would love to do this. You know, if you could adopt a tree, learn about it, find out, you know, about how fast it grows, you know, guesstimate how old it is, and then look back and do a little bit of research on, you know, what was happening during, you know, that year or that decade that, you know, your tree started growing. What a fascinating, you know, interaction between history and culture and your tree. That's such a cool idea. The other thing I thought of is I know here in Maryland, I've been on a hike before to go look at what they call champion trees. And Peter, do you know what a champion tree is?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. And this is something that gets evaluated every year because trees can fall down or get burned up. And so they grow. And so a champion tree is one that not only includes sometimes the tallest tree of a given species, but also the amount of crown area. So it's actually this nice math equation that brings in the height as well as sort of the width of those trees to come up with sort of a numbering system that allows foresters to actually compare them. And almost every state will have something like this going on. Here in Oregon on the West Coast, we have a lot of big champion trees because we get a lot of rain. And so we actually have quite a few. But going back to what you were asking about, Lorraine, these now tend to be on really steep slopes. And so it makes it really challenging to actually make some of these measurements because 50 years ago or 100 years ago, all of those champion trees, those big trees, were cut down because they were easy to get to. They were in the river valley bottoms. And now they've sort of been chased away or kind of, they're up where it's harder to reach for foresters. And so they will tend to be in a little bit harder to reach places or in national parks or protected areas like that. But this is one of those things that they go through species by species and kind of look for where are these champion trees. And so again, kind of going back to one of those guiding questions is where in your community is sort of the biggest tree of some of the different species that are out there. And then, that again, it gives us a way of actually making some comparisons. Because sometimes like the redwoods in California, they think that they've actually reached the maximum amount that they can keep growing up at least in height. And now they're kind of, spreading out a little bit more. And part of that goes back to gravity and trying to actually push water up 300 feet, and trying to get past gravity and then, dealing with drought. And some of those environmental pieces really also play into where we're finding these old trees and whether they will continue to survive under a changing climate. So there really is this big climate connection that is there associated with trees, especially the really long-lived ones.
Let's not underestimate the power of legal disputes. One of the small areas of first growth forest near State College, Pennsylvania, was hung up in countersuing claims, basically, that prevented it from being cut back, probably 100 years ago. It's now a state park. But the bottom line is there are these pockets which preserve trees as they existed in the days before the colonists started to really expand across the continent. And they make a marker on what trees do over centuries. They're worth looking at, possibly with ISAT-2 data.
That's great, Chris. I actually heard a similar story in Minnesota, where some of the tallest eastern white pine trees are actually in an area where the surveyors did a bad job of laying out the lines. And so there was just this small little 40-acre section that was sort of missed by the foresters. And so now that's actually where the tallest trees are located. And so, so some of these things, like our measurement systems have gotten better, like ISAT-2, for instance, that allow us to make some better measurements. So kind of going back to those original guiding investigative questions, comparing different ways of making measurements is a really powerful way of understanding the limitations of our data and helping us to understand the accuracy associated with those estimates.
Leading me back to one of my favorite pop quiz or bonus questions on tests when I was teaching. What's the northernmost state in the lower 48? The clue here is, of course, bad surveying. It's actually Minnesota, because there's this little bump up into Canada because somebody didn't get the latitude of the northern boundary correct.
And we're all living with those, with the ramifications of those measurements now.
Yes, we are. Those folks have to commute to the United States by boat or go through international checks to get back to the United States.
Wow, that's some great information for sure. All right, so it looks like we have about 2 minutes left, and I wanted to finish off with Peter Falcon, and I think it's a good place to end is why students should work together. Students are used to working together with each other in their own classroom, in their own school, but here we have this opportunity for students around the world to work together. So and Peter's been to a lot of cool places, just recently. He can talk about that, but and he's seen these students interact, and he just he sees the benefit firsthand. And let Peter Falcon talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Brian. To be honest, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, especially with Jeff on the line there. He's worked with everyone. But not only do we encourage the students to go out and make these measurements for us, but we also want them to encourage them to work with other schools, as Brian mentioned. There's a lot of benefits to that, and we are here to kind of help facilitate that if teachers are interested in doing that. We know a lot of active schools throughout the GLOBE program that would be more than interested and more than happy to work with schools like Jeff's school. In fact, he's one of the teachers I'm referring to. So some of the benefits would be, of course, learning about other people's culture a little bit and about their traditions, a little bit of the language as well, and learning about that scientific method. I mean, here at NASA, we have to learn to work with a lot of people from different countries that maybe you don't get along with, but you kind of have to get that work done. And that really starts in schools. So this would be a great opportunity for them to work with other students from other countries and kind of, realize not only their local problems, but the region, and understand what's going on with the world as well. So those are some of the things we'd like to encourage. And as I mentioned, we're here to facilitate that. So if there's anyone out there that's interested in working with other schools, by all means, please let me know. I'll be happy to kind of connect you with some of the schools that I know of, that I've been to, and those teachers as well. I'll just actually give them all to Jeff, since he does so much work and has so much time on his hand. I can see him nodding.
That's a silent nod from Jeff Bowen.
And actually, Jeff, if you wanted to add anything, because I know you work with a lot of other schools as well, by all means, please do.
The one thing I want to add tonight, and it's, I had to duck out for a little while, is the thing I noticed as a teacher, and this is what makes the Globe work so rich, is that when we started doing the tree height stuff, it was measuring trees just to make sure a satellite was working right. And tonight we're talking about champion trees and trees in Oregon and Minnesota borderlines. And it's so rich that what you've done is you've moved from one small thing and you've just opened it to like a depth of knowledge for as an educator. And I think that's so cool. And the same can be said for Mission Mosquito, because Dorian Janney's on here. At first it was, a public safety thing, and then it turned into a weather and climate thing. And I guess off topic from where Peter left me is that it's so cool to see how these programs have evolved, and they've really, just the content knowledge involved there is huge. And, with Globe, working with other schools is definitely a huge thing. Not just the whole teamwork approach to, future jobs and careers and things like that, but, thinking outside the box. Next generation science standards, one of the biggest things they want students to be able to do is engage in argumentation. And so you have your tree measurements, and you have 3 kids going outside to measure a tree, and you're talking about margin of error, tools, things like that, being able to work through, find the average, and actually agree on what they believe the tree height to be. It's aligned perfectly with what we're supposed to be doing in our science classes. So bravo, that's really where I guess I'm going with that. So
Yeah, that was amazingly said, Jeff. Yeah, that's what we try to do with these campaigns and with the Globe programming. We try to, we start off with a specific topic and then we expand it. I should say, I'm saying we as a Globe team, as a NASA team, as students around the world, we take all that information and we use that to help expand, the knowledge of, what everyone's looking for. Our planet's a big place. There's lots of things to measure. So, we're just a small part of that. But, when you have a global representation of observations coming in from the ground, you have, the synoptic view from satellites, you have aircraft, you have the aerial photography, you have the Aaron project, which you work with also, Jeff, using kites to do, remote sensing. So we have all these different platforms, and then we have those platforms to bring us the data. And then we have all these online tools like Peter Nelson mentioned and Christopher Schumann mentioned, all these online tools to help us understand that data better, which in turn helps us to, understand what's happening everywhere from local environments to globally. So, it's a huge process, but yeah, that you worded it so well, Jeff. How the expansion of it really helps everybody out. So, we are at a little bit after 9:00 p.m. Eastern time. So, does anybody have any last minute thoughts or ideas or questions? And I should mention that, this will be archived. This video will be archived on the webinar page on the campaign website, as well as all those links that were shared by Peter Nelson and Christopher Schumann and myself. So, they're all going to be up there. And one question came up from Lorraine, when the video is posted, is the chat part of it? And no, Zoom doesn't have it set up that the whole chat section is part of it, because some people send private messages to other people, and that it just wouldn't show up correctly. So, but I'll have all the information. I do get a chat log. So I look through that and pull things out, some of the questions I pull out, and then the links I'll pull out and then post that, with the webinar, with the archive webinar. All right. Anybody have anything else?
Hey, Brian, this is Peter.
Yeah.
Should we write if we want teachers to contact us, should we go ahead and put our email in the
Yeah.
chat box?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
I think one of the big things to keep in mind, because we've mentioned International Virtual Science Symposium a few times tonight, is the fact that it's been moved up. Was it 2 weeks earlier?
Yeah.
So you know, the biggest thing is you better get a move on it, just because that date always seems to sneak up when you're doing projects with students, and this year it's a little earlier again, which is I'm not looking forward to. The mad rush of papers coming in and all that, but
Yeah.
IVSS is earlier.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, they did move it up. Yeah. All right. So thank you, everyone. And, you know, remember the next webinar will be on Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. It's a, I can't
Wow,
believe it's-
2020. I
can't believe
like
it's gonna
the sound
be
though.
2020,
I like
yes.
the sound of 2020.
Yes.
Next year.
Oh, all right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll talk to you soon. And remember, you have our emails or any questions, you know how to get a hold of us. We also have on the campaign page, as you know, there's a section where you can, you know, write like a thread or any questions that pop up on that, you know, under the campaign community on our, on the Trees Campaign website on the Globe site. So
Okay.
thank you, everybody.
Good night, y'all.
Wait,
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Good night. Bye.
good night.